All right, let's explore what Liverpool being fourth in the coefficient actually means, if it even means anything, and why it probably is a good reflection on the long-term health of the club and also Klopp's long-term plan and long-term doings. Liverpool find themselves fourth behind a couple of other sides in Europe, and actually, I don't mind the sides that are ahead of us. Well, it's not that you know what I'm saying. Liverpool, the second best club in Europe over the last decade or so, you'd probably say. I don't think that's an unfair judgment. You could probably say there's another decade that belongs to maybe the Chelseas and the Uniteds and those kind of things, but that's now before this time. If people are born in this time or coming into their early teens, they won't really remember Manchester United like that. So it's an interesting reflection, but at the same time, I just wanted to kind of work out what it even meant and why a table isn't necessarily reflective of where teams actually are, especially considering that Arsenal, where are Arsenal in this table? Arsenal like 19th. Yeah, there are Arsenal down there. Barcelona find themselves 18th. Liverpool find themselves in 4th by Man City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, and of course then Liverpool. But ahead of Roma, who are ahead of PSG, who are ahead of Villarreal, Dortmund, Chelsea. It shows that if you can do something in the Europa League, which, you know, is still a very respectable, but not quite as prestigious competition as the Champions League, then you can still actually put a fairly healthy points total together. And I want to show you what the points actually mean on this, right? Point system for the Champions League, but also for the UEL and the UECL. So for instance, all wins from the group stage, 2 points. All wins in qualifying and playoff matches, UCL, UEL, 1. All draws from the group stage, obviously 1 point. 0.5, all draws in qualifying. And it goes on like that. Group stage bonus, participation, you get 4 points. So you're still kind of racking up points even if you just participated. Round of 16, 4 points if you just participated. Group winners. Oh, that's only in the UEL, interesting. And then where's the next UCL one? Each round clubs reach for the round from the round of 16 on, you get 1 point, which doesn't really feel all that fair considering how much more difficult it actually would be to do that in the Champions League, but is what it is. Liverpool were contributing to their coefficient even when they were in the Europa League, and that's what's really important here. We obviously find ourselves ahead of the likes of Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal, just behind Man City. But when I say just behind, we're actually maybe just one season away from competing relatively closely with Real Madrid and Manchester United, and Manchester City. Liverpool on average have done about 25, 26 points in Europe over the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, the 33 drags us up, so I'd probably say we're probably close to like 25. But the point is that like Liverpool have done relatively well over this last 5 years. And actually, if you look at the last 10 years, which is basically the time under Klopp, and I go back to the previous year because I can't see anything else, Liverpool find themselves over the last decade in 5th place, behind Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. Obviously, Barcelona sort of tipped themselves in there in the 14-15, 15-16, and the 16-17 season. And then things begin to, well, actually, they don't really level off all that much for Barcelona, which probably shows how much the coefficient really matters over the long term. But anyway, Liverpool find themselves, again, second to Manchester City, Manchester City in 4th, Liverpool in 5th. What I kind of wanted to talk about here was, first of all, the fact that just missing one season in the Champions League or missing one season in any of these European competitions makes a big difference. And why it doesn't really reflect how your club is doing, but is actually, it's more of a general reflection if you're towards the top of it. You should really group them into like little bunches. Is your team relatively healthy? Yes. Is your team becoming healthy? Yes. Is your team obviously better off than everyone else in your country if you're in the European rankings? Yes. But compared to other clubs, where do you really sit? Juventus is still in there for the last decade. Have Juventus really been relevant in the Champions League? I don't feel they've really been all that relevant over the last couple of years. They've not really done anything that blew my mind, and that's not even a slight on them. I think they probably could come back to rude health with Motta. I think they probably could do better. The same for PSG, and probably the same for Atletico Madrid, who obviously got a good record over the last decade. But the point is Liverpool here, right? We find ourselves on 245 points. If we that's over the last decade. Obviously, I think that just about encompasses that's basically the beginning of Klopp up until now, right? That season when we dropped out, the season where really we were doing a bit of a rebuild, it was a little bit difficult to get things on track. kind of cost us being basically not even level with Man City. We'd be ahead of Man City if we'd have even probably got into the Champions League and just done anything in the group stages. That season, we'd probably be close to level with Barcelona because we're only 25 points off them, roughly average 25 points per season. And obviously we had some pretty poor seasons just before that. The 14-15 season, we got the 10 points. Anyway, point is, if we'd have been in the Champions League that season, we'd probably been top 4 for all those teams, if not top 3 for all those teams. And then there's quite a significant difference between Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, who very continually compete. And this is kind of one thing that I really wanted to talk about. One thing I really noticed last season, and obviously you knew I was massively keen on Arsenal if you watched my other channel last season in the Champions League, you'll know that I thought Arsenal are a better overall team than Real Madrid, a better overall team than Bayern Munich. Now, Liverpool fans, you might agree, you might disagree. I think the Premier League is probably the most intense league in Europe. I think it's most mentally and physically taxing. I think it's a league where there's a lot more intensity. The lifestyle is definitely a lot more intense. Bayern Munich, Real Madrid have built themselves up to be these crazy level of institutions that allow them to kind of separate a little bit from the rest of the leagues. I mean, what was the hardest game that Real Madrid relatively went through last season in La Liga? It definitely wasn't the Barcelona games. There wasn't even really a close position. I mean, if you look at Real Madrid, look at that. If you look at the 23-24 season, they were 10 points ahead of Barcelona. There wasn't any competition in that league. And it points to everything else that I'm speaking about here. Real Madrid, Bayern Munich absolutely dominate their leagues. And, rightly so. They've built themselves up to be behemoth institutions. But it shows how much easier the Champions League is for them, how much more achievable it is, because those guys are not barely exerting themselves. I don't want to be disrespectful to the other teams, but there is very little exertion. And the fact that Man City are able to even compete with them on an institutional level, I think Man City have done a great job, everything else aside, of building an institution there. Whether you think they've supercharged it or whatever, that's another conversation. This is the task, is what I'm trying to say, that sits ahead of what Michael Edwards has to achieve here, of what, the multi-club system that potentially is Bordeaux and Liverpool potentially is here. And I think Liverpool have got to find a way to institutionalize in a positive way themselves and make them into a bigger power than they currently are. Part of that is obviously probably looking at other clubs within Europe and how we can take some of those models. I'm not talking about Bordeaux when I'm talking about that. There's probably also just attracting big talent, and actually it doesn't seem all that much as if agents and players look at, they probably will have that in their mind, as in look at the last 5 years of how well Liverpool have performed, like it is, I can perform that well with Liverpool, or I can perform that well at Bayern or Manchester United or whatever. Bear in mind also, if you're Manchester United, you can afford to pay higher wages, you can afford to woo the bigger players because of the potential institution that you are, the wages, the transfer fees, all those kind of things. They can still do that because of their commercial deals, which shows how powerful they've been. And really, what's crazy actually is Manchester United should be well ahead of Man City and Liverpool in England, but have really lagged behind. And it's testament to how well Liverpool have done over the last decade. Not only, I think we really owe a lot to Klopp in terms of getting us through this competition, building a side who's able to compete on multiple fronts, but also is able to compete with the very top teams, the institutions such as Real Madrid, even though obviously we lost to them fairly regularly. We did beat Bayern Munich. We've done very well against Man City in the league and actually in the Champions League as well under Klopp in this time. But if you look at it, like, Liverpool is still a distance off Bayern, Real Madrid and Man City. They're on 96 points. Bayern find themselves on 108. That's up here. The 119 and then 123. Not a massive difference between City and Real Madrid there. Liverpool have not really, the only season where they really dropped away was this 19 and 21. They probably slightly underachieved. But even then, we'd only be adding 1 point on for every extra round that we went through. And then the winning of it, maybe there's something in there. It's overall contributing to us doing better in the draws, us doing better in other positions. Being able to flex that in Europe, I think is fantastic. And I think being able to rely on that is also good. What I would say is I see other clubs catching up with a lot of these sides. You can see, I think a lot of people, when they saw the Instagram version of this list, and this is where I saw it, was like, well, where are Arsenal? Where are Manchester United? Well, obviously Manchester United won't be in there, but where are Arsenal? Where are... Who else did they say was meant to? I think Arsenal were the only people they really thought were sort of lacking in there. Maybe some people thought there was like a Bayer Leverkusen thing, but it has to be the long term here. It can't just be a one season and out kind of thing. And obviously, Bayer weren't even in the top tier, so you know. Anyway, point is, it's up to Michael Edwards to bridge, and obviously Richard Hughes, to bridge this gap in this time and make Liverpool into an institution that, you know, is able to compete with Real Madrid. And not just by making up the numbers in the aggregate, by actually building Liverpool into something that they can compete with in the long run. I think that's really important for us as a club. Not that I'm saying I want to become a faceless institution like I feel a lot of people at Real Madrid and the way their fans treat their players, the way their fans treat the institution can sometimes feel that way. I don't think we're going to be managed in that same way or owned in that same way. I just don't think that's the way that Michael Edwards would probably want to construct a culture at a club. And the same Bayern Munich. Like Bayern Munich have, you know, they've dropped away very significantly recently because they haven't got the hierarchy correct at their club, and because they've actually been taken over by a load of, not taken over, but like, you know, the board level, they've had real issues up there. I think it's, you know, it's well and good Liverpool blowing their trumpet and saying this is good, but they have to make this momentum, and the Klopp momentum that has been built up over this last few years, even if we are grateful to him, even if we do feel there were issues during the Klopp era, even if Klopp and Edwards weren't able to work together in the way that we wanted them to, we do owe a lot of this momentum to Klopp. And I think it's worth just remembering, first of all, there are some things that didn't go so well under Klopp. We were stuttering and stopping sometimes because we were so exhausted from previous seasons, because we were exhausted because we couldn't always invest in the players we wanted to or the size of squad that we wanted to. But also Klopp very often preferred a smaller squad anyway. So was that also a tactical choice on his part? But also because other people are just bigger institutions in terms of what they've been able to build, what they've been able to fund, what they've been able to do and, you know, put money into. Real Madrid have got a very different funding system to Liverpool. Their on-field funding, very different to their off-field funding. The same for Man City, and the same goes for Bayern Munich. But you can see that you're able to bridge that gap if you're Roma and Inter Milan and even Villarreal and Dortmund. Those guys are competing, you know, Dortmund are in the Champions League final this year. There's a lot there for us to kind of take away in terms of conclusions, right? Dortmund last year finished with 29 points, obviously because they reached the Champions League final, but they also did pretty well on the way there as well. I'm not saying this is an absolute reflection of the health of the club, but it is a pretty good pointer. Having said that, Liverpool will actually, you know, if they don't do well in the Champions League this year, say they do drop away and it's difficult for Arne Slot to compete on a number of fronts, they probably will find themselves closer to the PSGs and the Villarreals in terms of point total. They've got that 24-point total there. In the aggregate, they'll have the 19 and the 20, and if they have another 19 or 20 season, you're dropping off. You're probably closer to the Romas than you are to the Bayern Munichs, and the Real Madrids, and the Man Cities. The point here is about putting some context around the numbers that we see and what we're grateful to Klopp for, but also what we know Michael Edwards had to build from this step up, rather than keeping Liverpool at this point. And, you know, I know a lot of people are very skeptical of FSG. I think overall this is actually a really good reflection of some of the on-pitch wins that we've had and how well Klopp, in particular, has done in this time with or without Michael Edwards by his side. Obviously, Pep Lynch has been huge in that as well. I think tactics, as we've seen at the Euros, are a great way of bridging that gap. Man City obviously have that combo of both. We'll see what happens when Pep leaves. Very, very different time then for Man City. Very difficult to replace him. Very difficult to attract players in the same way if you are Man City. And obviously what we've recently found out is that they've had their hearing, or the initial hearing, behind closed doors. Those things have now come out. You know, we're hearing all sorts of things. I won't comment on that right now. So there may be fallout from that as well. And what the ramifications are from that for UEFA, but also for the Premier League, we'll see. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you care that much about coefficient? I know I don't, but it's a nice little win for the club, right? Fourth in Europe's, you know, obviously I'd love to be top, but it is where it is. Yeah, let me know in the comments below and I'll chat to you in a while. Much love. Bye.